North Carolina. And we are so glad to have you as part of our class today. And welcome everyone who's watching online. Today we're going to be going into chapter 13 of Deuteronomy. We've already done the first section, which had to do with doing away with any prophets or priests of paganism, as well as their sites for worship and idolatry. Today it gets a little worse because we're starting at verse 6, and this is I think this is a very timely section for us today. Let's see what they have to say. If anyone secretly entices you, even if it is your brother, your father's son, or your mother's son, or your own son or daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your most intimate friend, saying, "Let us go worship other gods, whom neither you nor your ancestors have known," any of the gods of the peoples that are around you, whether near you or far away, from one end of the earth to the other, you must not yield to or heed any such persons. Show them no pity or compassion, and do not shield them. And afterward the hand of all the people. Stone them to death for trying to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Then all Israel shall hear and be afraid, and never again do any such wickedness. That's rough. Okay? Now, one of the reasons why I think this is especially relevant to us today is that we have just gone through an election that has been divisive. Okay, the campaigns have been nasty, and the repercussions have been such that there are people advocating that you do not have anything to do with a family member that voted in a different way than you voted, and that you should, even if they're your kids, your grandkids, have nothing to do with them because they have voted for an evil thing. And because they have voted for an evil thing, then don't bring that evil into your house. Hey, does it sound like that second paragraph in chapter 13?
Close.
What do we do with this kind of attitude? Because there are faith groups today that have such things as honor killings and anyone who deviates. If for instance, like I was saying last week, if I had converted that Muslim to Christianity, both he and I would be subject to the death penalty in Saudi Arabia and in other Muslim countries, especially countries like Iran. But the laws are very strict on that. Anybody who leads you away from a particular faith. And we have seen, even within Christianity, if somebody goes from Baptist to Methodist, oh my God, but we have, within each family group, you're going to have people who would be considered apostate by the faith group that you are part of. And the question is, do you continue that relationship? And we've had that kind of discussion with people who have different lifestyles. If they have a different lifestyle, do you excommunicate them from your family? It used to be that you could even have people arrested for doing that sort of thing, for mixed marriages, for instance, and for other behaviors. And they just, on the one hand, you want to keep your faith, okay, and you may believe very strongly in a particular form of Christianity or even in another religion. But what is the alternative view that we have from the New Testament on that?
Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbors.
Love your enemies.
Okay. Love your enemies. Pray for those who despitefully use you. Okay? Paul says to people who are contemplating marriage, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. So he doesn't believe in marriages across religious lines. Okay? But at the same time, he's saying to people who are in those relationships, don't divorce the other person. Okay? God has put you into their life so that you may be the vehicle of their salvation. So, I've done weddings for people who had radically different faith beliefs. I always include that issue in the premarital counseling so that they have a better understanding. Because a lot of times, people will get into a relationship like that because they really don't understand their own faith. Or what are the differences between this faith group or another faith group? What are the cultural issues involved? And the wider the gap, if you're talking about somebody who is into the faith, then it becomes a lot harder for them to justify the relationship. And I have found that people have found themselves entrapped because they've married somebody and then they went to another country where that was the predominant faith, and all of a sudden they can't get out, they can't leave, and their whole social standing changes radically. So on the one hand, I think it's important, most of all, for people to really understand what their faith is to begin with. And if you've been casual about religion, then you're much more susceptible to being unequally yoked together with a group that might find that union unlawful, or where there is a tremendous amount of pressure for someone to convert over to the other side. But here we have guidelines where you're supposed to not only condemn a person who is advocating idolatry, but you're supposed to have them arrested. And they're part of your family, and you're supposed to stone them to death. And if they're going to be stoned to death, then the family members are the ones who have to pick up the first stone to kill them. And I can tell you, in predominantly Muslim societies, that has been the rule. I have, we've talked earlier about a woman who wanted to buck Saudi law on women driving. And while the American troops were in Saudi Arabia, she was not arrested. But as soon as Desert Storm was over and we began to withdraw from that country, she was arrested. She was taken to a public arena. She was buried up to her neck, and her family had to stone her to death. So I mean, that's just how they do.
So that's still going on today?
It depends on the country. It depends on the country. The laws in Saudi Arabia have become much more liberalized since I was there, and women have more freedoms. They can drive legally now.
Does the Quran support that attitude? If it is, it's totally useless.
It's not the Quran per se, because there is nothing about driving automobiles in the Quran. No, I'm serious. In Saudi Arabia, there were like no speed limits because there are no speed limits in the Quran. So, and believe me, there were no speed limits. Now, if you go to UAE, definitely got speed limits. You better watch yourself there, because every 150 feet there's another camera, and every time you click a camera going over the limit, you get a $500 fine. So, pay attention. There's no cops on the road. They don't need them.
Yeah, they just shoot them.
Well, they just,
So in your own family, if your grandmother and your grandfather,
Yes.
what does she do with her religion?
Okay. My grandfather came from an Orthodox Jewish family. My grandmother came from an Irish Catholic family. They were both first-generation Americans. They both got thrown out of their family. Now, in accordance with what's here, on my grandfather's side, they said Kaddish because he was dead to them. They actually had a funeral for my grandfather. He was dead to the family. On the Irish Catholic side, my grandmother was excommunicant, not only from the church, but also from her family. They had nothing to do with her after she married this Jewish guy. And they became Seventh-day Adventists. Okay?
Where in the world did that come from?
Well, because Seventh-day Adventists are more adherent to Mosaic law than other Protestant denominations. So they had the same Sabbath as the Jewish community. They saw it as a compromise. The thing that I find really interesting, because I've read some Seventh-day Adventist material, and they are very apocalyptic and they are very critical of Judaism in their teachings. So I found that interesting. But I will say that when it came to reconciliation, I can remember probably 4 or 5 years old, I was sitting on my great-grandfather's lap, my Jewish great-grandfather's lap, in his house.
Now, is this your grandfather or great-grandfather?
My great-grandfather,
Okay.
the one who excommunicated my grandfather, or had Kaddish for my grandfather.
Okay.
Okay? There was a reconciliation within the Jewish family, but never the Irish Catholic family. I never met my great-grandparents on my Irish Catholic side. I know almost nothing about them. But you can see how some of these things work in to family relationships. And today especially, when people are literally advocating that you excommunicate family members because of the way they voted, forget religion, you know? And I think the people who are advocating that have in fact forgotten religion. I see that.
That's all well and good, but when I'm reading this, I'm reading it as only, we're talking about idols.
Yes.
Worshiping gods other than our God.
That's true, but the principle has carried over.
To other things.
Yes. The principle is carried over.
So where do they get their authority if it's been carried over? The Bible gives these people, the Word gives these people the authority to kill someone who's leading you astray.
Right.
But where does the authority come from with groups that are not Christian or of a religion or just of a political party? Where are they getting their authorization to do the things that are being done?
People are looking not at the specifics of this law, but at the general principle of the law.
Well, it's kind of like taking a verse out of the Bible and using it to fit your needs.
You think?
I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my impression. And it does not fit with a Christ-like attitude.
Well, I'm on, because I won't talk. Okay, because this whole thing that we're talking about, and we're talking about political parties. This party sees this party some way. It's both ways. It's both ways. You know?
On the extremes, yes.
Yeah, it's both ways. That you see what that person, you don't believe what they believe, and they don't believe what we believe, or whoever, whatever
Right.
it is. So, I see I see them getting mad with each other and saying ugly things, and I do know that families already talked about not getting together for Thanksgiving because of political divide.
Yes.
But I don't think it's gone any further than that yet, has it?
If they could legally carry it further, they would.
See, because they don't have the law.
They don't have the law in this country
Right.
yet. And that's why we got to pay attention. Because there has always been, I will say this, that if you want to look at some of the deadliest things that have ever happened in the history of humankind, the deadliest movement in the history of mankind, more than Genghis Khan, okay, has been some form of socialism. It is not merely economic. It is not merely economic. One of the principles of socialism, and you can read this in Marx, and I think this is important for us to learn as well, because the principle applies also to religious groups, okay? There is something in Marxist doctrine called the end of the dialectic. And that's a term I think Marx probably coined. But the dialectic is the conversation where you have two sides of an argument. And at the end of the discussion, you can't go your separate ways. One side has to prevail. And Marx's view was that in a utopian society, there is no viable alternative that can be presented. So that people who present a viable alternative, or an alternative of any sort, whether it's viable or not, are people who need to be condemned and ostracized and ultimately killed. And more people have been killed under communism and Nazism and other socialist attitudes than any other movement in the history of humankind. So socialism is not merely an economic system, it's one that says there is an end to the dialectic. There is no more discussion. There is no other point of view that can be promoted.
What? I said, are you saying, is she socialist?
Now she just in
You would rather,
We all are, Billy, all of us.
Oh, yeah. See how this gets into families?
Dennis,
Yeah,
everybody knows that this last election has been very
contentious, yes.
yes.
Not as contentious as the one in 1860, but
Well,
yeah.
I wasn't here then. I would say probably 95% of my family and friends, we were not voting for the same person.
Mhm.
And I've had family and I've had friends get in my face, literally, get in my face about their candidates. And I say to them, or said to them, let's agree to disagree and drop it. And a lot of times, they wouldn't drop it.
They wouldn't drop
But let me make my point. Let me tell you. And I would just very nicely say, hush. I don't want to hear it. Hush. Shut up. Be quiet. Leave me alone. And walk away.
That's right. What I tried, when I do premarital counseling, I get into a section that I call the rules of warfare. And it's how do you disagree in a way that does not destroy your relationship?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I mean,
Yeah,
with family, but especially with friends.
right.
Because there have been, like on Facebook, I have done away with certain people on Facebook because it was a constant everyday thing.
It's
Well-
just like we've always heard, you don't discuss politics and you don't discuss religion.
Exactly.
That's just the
Or
way it is.
sports.
And you just go about your life.
Right.
It's okay, I mean, I don't love you.
I think one of the wonderful experiences of my childhood was that I had, I was brought up in a family full of contention. And when we had family gatherings like Thanksgiving or Christmas, these things were always brought up, and they were heated arguments. And my Uncle Bob was so the other way. But yeah, and then I had some really fiery uncles on the other side, and I was just a fly on the wall watching this stuff. And the thing that was really cool is that when the mother said, "Okay, it's time to eat," we all sat down.
Well, the difference is they didn't have social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the difference. But I think the real difference was that as fiery as some of those arguments got, my uncle would do anything for us if we were in desperate need. On both sides. It didn't matter. They were family, and they were going to be there, and it didn't matter that we had these differences. We were going to look out for each other one way or the other, and did. And
Did my uncle ever change the other uncle's mind?
No, are you kidding me?
Absolutely not.
Are you kidding me?
It's so fruitless to do that stupid stuff. Unless you just like to argue, and some people just like to argue.
There you go.
And that's fine, but you're not gonna change anybody's
But
mind.
don't argue
It's
in
just
my
stupid.
face.
What?
Don't get in my face and argue.
Well, that's
Go
what I
find
said. Some people
somebody
just
else.
like to argue, and
Okay.
they'll figure out anything. Politics is a good thing to argue on.
People split not over the divisions that they have, but the way the divisions are presented. It's how do you communicate with each other, okay? And one of the things that I try to emphasize with people who are contemplating getting married, and it's funny because when they're sitting down in front of me, they don't have any divisions. They're fine with each other, Come back 5 years later and see what happens. But
Or 40.
I said, why are you arguing? Okay, why are you arguing? And is the purpose of the argument to further divide you or to bring you together? Okay? And the purpose of having these divisive discussions is so that you can come to an accommodation with each other. And if there's an impasse, is that impasse worth the dissolution of your relationship? Okay? Generally speaking, not. And a lot of times these impasses don't come from within the two who are arguing. They came from outside influences, like in politics, or something that's said from the pulpit, or something, somebody else brought it in. And then it became an issue between two people who didn't have any issues before. So the question is, what is the value of the division? If the division is not worth your relationship, then blow it off. It's not something that needs to ruin the love that you have for each other. One of the things that I did advocate, though, because I know every once in a while things would get really heated. One person would get into somebody's face, okay, or they would talk in a way that was demeaning, or they just had an attitude generally. The person who felt like this is going the wrong way and could be worse can call a timeout. And you call a timeout. And a timeout would last an hour. And then you could sit down and maybe try and talk about it, okay? I recommended that you go to separate bathrooms, say what you're going to say in the mirror, and then come back and have the discussion. Or just go out and have a walk and, talk to yourself for a while. But at the end of the hour, you could come back and say things with a little more measure to it, you could call 2 timeouts. Okay? You were authorized 2 timeouts. The person who called the timeout, by the way, could end it if they thought we could get back into a good discussion. But the other person could not. So they just, and I've had couples come back and say, that's the best advice you ever gave. But the Bible also says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Okay? So try and end it as soon as you can. Get it out of the way. And, if it's just one of those things that's going to be simmering and simmering and simmering, that's not healthy. Yeah.
There should be a law that says, I disagree with what you say, but I will defend you to the death. Your right to say it. Wait a minute, there is a law. It's called the Constitution.
That's exactly right.
And I'm not going to go any further because
That's right. I had a person.
Politician should have to read the Constitution in front of them, everybody they know,
Yeah,
to make sure they understand what it means.
that's right. I had a person in this church who had a hat that I might have found offensive. And she said to me, I'm surprised. I was at one of our dinners and I was sitting down next to her. And she said, I'm surprised you're sitting next to me with me wearing this hat. And I said, I went into combat so you could wear that hat. You know? So, I mean, the thing is, when there is an end to dialectic, there is an end to lives. And you need to be very careful about it. Churches are very prone to that same Marxist attitude, that there is an end to dialectic. Okay? I take a long view at churches. We've been going through dialectics for a long time in the church, and we've come up with some doctrines that have been pretty sound, and we've dumped some that were not. And a lot of things that we've dumped over the years, and it's taken us millennia to do it, is to come to a point where we don't think that somebody who's a Presbyterian is a mortal enemy. You know? And I spent a good part of my ministerial career working across denominational lines to see where we could work together on some real big issues and disasters and stuff, and actually got denominations that wouldn't have anything to do with each other to come together. Even Mormons, we've had Mormons come into the disaster thing and be cooperative, and we've had Baptists who have not always been cooperative to be cooperative in some of these efforts. And they found that the more they cooperated with each other, the less expensive and the more efficient their operations became. So, it's just something that benefits, and we need to realize that within Christianity there is something called the Holy Catholic Church, where it's we recognize the Christianity across denominational lines, and it goes beyond that. I had one group that we formed in a town here in North Carolina, got hit by a tornado really bad, and they put together an ecumenical community response to the thing. We funded it, got it going and all. But in that particular instance, the local synagogue wanted to get involved. And I had one guy come up to me and say, we take turns doing prayers, and it's the Jewish guy's turn to pray, and I wonder, what am I supposed to do about that? And I said, you're supposed to listen. And if anybody is praying for you, God bless them. You may not agree with them on their theology, but they're talking to the same God you are. So just bear that in mind. Listen. You don't have to endorse their belief system. All you have to do is listen to what they have to say, and you might be surprised that maybe their belief system isn't so different from yours in many, many respects. So
Years
somewhere along the
ago,
line, we've lost the fact that the institution is worth preserving
Yes.
Whether it's the government, whether it's the church. And too many people now have taken the attitude, it's not worth preserving if you're not going to do it my way.
That's correct.
So the bottom line is in churches and in politics, we need to elect better politicians on both sides. They've lost the fact that the government and the country is worth preserving. But they all think if you don't do it my way, then it's not worth preserving.
This, I think the perfect evidence of that is what has just happened to the United Methodist Church.
Absolutely. Perfect example.
Perfect example. My way or the highway. Okay, where's the on-ramp? You know? It's just, it's silly.
There could have been middle ground there if both sides were willing to try to work together to develop. I mean, the middle ground was easy. You know,
Yes.
choose to be this way if you want. If you don't, choose not to be this way. The conference is not going to come down and make you do their way or whatever.
Yes, and
But
we need to make sure that
politics,
never
it's
becomes the
churches,
case.
It's everything. You
Yeah.
know, there's no middle ground. Nobody wants to work together anymore. It's always got to be my way.
That's right, and one of the things that we need to be very cautious about is that there has not, within all of Christendom and Christian religions in the United States, no denomination has represented the culture of the United States more than the United Methodist Church. We cross more lines than any other denomination. And if we can't get along in the United Methodist Church, that speaks very poorly of society at large. Okay? Because one of the hallmarks of Methodism, and the one that I think I cherish the most, is its tolerance for people to be able to speak out and present an alternative point of view, unlike what we see in chapter 13 in Deuteronomy.
When I was 16, I think, growing up, we always went to a Baptist church.
Yeah.
Well, my father and mother helped found this church.
Okay.
This new Baptist church. I can remember going in a room and them having church before they got the church. So they were very involved. Well, something happened, I don't know what, but anyway, they left. My mother had always been a Baptist, my father had always been a United Methodist. They left and went to the United Methodist Church. And me and my sister were in, I think it was the corner drugstore down in our neighborhood, and I ran into an old man that was in the Baptist church.
We got to wind this down, so.
And I was talking to him, and he told me that me and my sister were going to hell because we had gone from Baptist to Methodist.
Well, you know, it happens that way. Hell's going to be a big place, I think. Surprise, surprise. Okay, well, thank you for being with us, and invite your questions and comments. This has been an interesting discussion, but I think it's very prescient because this is exactly the kind of attitude that we are finding infused into our society today, and I would caution you not to follow the dictates of chapter 13 in Deuteronomy. God bless you.
Thank you.